So, as everybody said, I am Tim Begin. I'm here to fill in for Neil Shannon, who is going to do a presentation on 12-factor apps. Unfortunately, I'm not probably going to get as deep in detail as you want in some of these areas, mostly because in spring days, I'm going to start going into data sources. So this is my shameless plug. So if you have any questions, I am also going to give a GitHub repo. I'm going to have it available after we get done here, and I've cleaned up the code. So all of the code we're going to look at today is using technologies and implementations that I hate. Okay, how's that? You can sit down, Matt. Thanks. All right, 12-factor apps. Does anybody know why we have 12 factors with apps? I guess it's a good thing you came here tonight then. So, is there anybody that has ever written an application and it was a lot of stuff and you like jammed it all together, and the more you worked on it and the bigger it got and the more fun you had trying to deploy it, and then you would get, I don't know, into your production environment and sit in abject horror while you watch the ops guy manually make configuration changes to the production web server and then go, oops, I'm in the wrong data center. Has that ever happened to anybody? No? Everybody's like, they're recording this, I don't want to get seen. They're filming me, you don't have to worry. This came from Heroku. Heroku created a platform as a service. A platform as a service means that all you as an application developer need to do is worry about writing your application, and they will take care of everything else for you, allegedly. So what they said is, if you follow these 12 factors, it's going to help you write an application that is more stable and is easier to deploy than ever before. So what we're saying is we're going to use this declarative formats for setup automation to minimize time and cost for new developers joining the project, have a clean contract with the underlying operating system, offering maximum portability between execution environments. They're suitable for deployment on modern. Okay, so this is all the stuff that Neil threw out there. I wanted to make sure you didn't get a bait and switch. I'm not going to go through and read all those. I'm going to start going down the list of the 12 items there, and I have worked with a couple of clients, specifically in the Atlanta area with Home Depot. Is there anybody here from Home Depot that's worked in this? Yay! So you've done a cup service deploy? Yes, it's fun, isn't it? Does anybody else know what a cups deploy is? Okay, Glenn. Oh, this is going to be fun. Okay. So the 12-factor methodology it's not required to use a platform as a service. If you take these principles and you just take it in your everyday application development, it makes your life a lot easier. One of the biggest challenges that I had when I worked with people trying to transform into more of an agile and a microservice and a fast and a lean environment is to get their heads around some of these concepts. So Heroku said, this is what we do in order to make our development work faster, better, cheaper, so on and so forth, and minimize downtime. I have been able to write and deploy a microservice in about 45 minutes and get it into production at Home Depot. I came in, they said, hey, we need to do this, and I didn't do a whole lot of stuff. I just took this feed in, and I decided whether it needed to be sent to point A or point B. And then we pushed it out. So that was kind of successful. People were shocked. I said, well, we weren't doing a whole lot. We had something that was very well defined, and then the platform was managed for me. So all I did was I used Spring's tools, and we just kind of walked through there. So this is a link. It's on 12factor.net. It says, who should read this document? It's any developer building applications which run as a service, ops engineers who deploy or manage such applications. I would just say it's anybody that wants to write good, solid code, because a lot of these principles aren't new to working in whatever as a service. It just helps you get your thought process in place where you can understand what the different bits and pieces are that are going together. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we can get through a couple of these, because out of the 12, there's probably 4 or 5 that we really want to spend some time on, and I would like to get past 9. The first factor is a code base, one code base tracked in revision control with many deploys. Is there anybody here that disagrees with that? Is anybody here that understands with that? So, is there anybody here that has used a public-facing repository with Git, like GitHub? All right. Anybody here know what my middle initial is? No. So if you go out into GitHub, github.com, it's TPBEGIN. So it's Tim, and then begin. In this language, my name is a verb. You will find that there is a repository there. It has a README file in it. It has nothing else in it. But that's where I'm going to be placing any of the stuff that I get after we get done tonight. I will put it up in this repository, and that will be one code base, and it'll be tracked in revision control, and we're going to do many deploys from that. Dependencies, explicitly declare and isolate dependencies. Does this mean anything to anyone? Does anybody remember having DLL hell? Does anybody remember having callback hell? Does anybody just remember having hell of being in traffic coming over here this afternoon? Okay. There's some people in the middle are waiting for it to get funny. I apologize. I was just trying to get code to work. So what this means is that when you're building your code, you want to explicitly say, I want to use these dependencies. So if I'm going to use Tomcat, I'm going to explicitly say, I'm going to get Tomcat. And so on and so forth. Now they have in Maven, especially, you can get transitive dependencies. Things get all cool, and you're saying, oh, I need this, and then this guy needs this, and then this guy needs this. You really want to declare everything that you can possibly think of that you need. That way, if you have problems, you know what you brought along to the table. The other thing is when you're going to push this out into a platform as a service like Heroku or with Cloud Foundry, especially in the Java environment. I know that we had Scala out there. Unfortunately, I don't have anything from Scala, but from a Java standpoint, I push everything out as an executable jar. It collects up all the dependencies I just built and tested that with, and it moves it into the platform for me. That way I know I have explicitly brought everything in there that I meant to bring over in there. So that isolating dependencies and declaring means that you said what you meant and you meant what you said. Is there anybody that doesn't get that? Okay. Sorry, Matt. Have Rodrigue, he'll answer it for you. Number 3 is near and dear to my heart, and we're actually going to come back to this. Store the config in the environment. If you have a database connection, username, password, anybody have problems getting production, username, passwords, URLs, any of that stuff? So that's what this is talking about, is any of that stuff that you have to connect to, you shouldn't have to worry about. You should have other people that say, I'm going to give you database connection, you just use database connection in the environment, and then we're going to store it in the configuration. I actually have some other stuff to talk about in the repo later. But this goes hand in hand with number 4, which is the backing services. We want to treat backing services as attached resources. What this means is it doesn't matter if you've got a database, a cache, you've got a disk out here, you want to just deal with it as a service. You want to say, I'm just going to use whatever has been provided for me. So as a developer, you don't have to worry about checking what environment am I in? What is this URL? What is this? I'm going to get that stuff from the config, and then I'm just going to connect to it like it's a data source. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to take a MySQL database or a Postgres database or an H2 database. So when you move your application out into your local environment or into a cloud environment or a test environment or a production environment, you just have to worry about having the database. And this doesn't make a lot of sense. Hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense when I open up some of the code examples and I show you how they wire this together. But what is the difference between your development and your test. When you say development and test, what is it that makes those different? Sorry? It's the database. Usually when people are talking about the environment, they're talking about the data source that they're pointing to. So you as a developer spend all this time trying to figure out, well, who am I pointing to? Am I pointing to development? Am I pointing to test? Am I pointing to stage? Am I pointing to... And then after they get done massacring the production configurations environments and the correct one, then all the QA people are pressing buttons and trying to make sure that you didn't just break something, and then you go through there. So what this is saying is, if you take the data source and you abstract it out as a backing service, I just got to point to the data source. That's why they call them data sources. So when I get the data source and I have it configured for the appropriate area, I don't have to worry about whether or not the password has to change. They can change it, push it out, restage it, and it's taken care of. You as a developer don't have to do 75 people's jobs, unless you want to. So 5, build, release, run. I don't normally read through these, but I want to go through them so everybody has at least heard them. When I get into the code, then I can refer back to them. So that's why I'm going through this. The build, release, run. You strictly separate the build and the run stages. So how many people here build in every deployment that they push out in an environment? You guys just not going to want to raise your hands back there, are you?
You're embarrassed.
What's the problem when you build in every environment? So if I build my binaries in development, and then I go to test, and I build and I deploy the stuff out there, and then I build and I deploy the stuff into production. Does anybody?
Testing you did in a lower environment is invalidated.
Yeah, have you done any testing in production? Well, you are. You're testing in production. Exactly right. So, like, there's some teams at Netflix, specifically. Everybody likes to talk about Netflix. I mean, I talked with a guy, and he said, the only thing that changes when I spin up my environment is the data sources I point to. And I know that what's in production was tested because it's the same exact thing that I did through all these other environments. So I know that works. And if it doesn't, then we've got somewhere to go back and say, okay, where did the breakdown happen? The other thing is that if you follow this build, release, run, it gives you the opportunity to build your artifacts. You have your binaries and you keep them here, and this is what you're going to move from point A to wherever it needs to go. But then you can store your configurations elsewhere in a secret repo. It's not secret like nobody knows about it. It's meant like we're going to keep the secret information we don't want anybody to see, like production passwords and all of that. It can all be automated, so you have a deploy step, and then the run step is really part of, it's platform dependent. So if you're doing a Node application or a .NET application, you're going to run differently than if I'm running a .NET, a Java application or Heroku, so on and so forth. But the key point is you separated your building and your running, and you push that out there. Does that make sense? So the processes, you want to execute the app as one or more stateless processes. That's probably the biggest challenge that people have, is because you've got a big monolithic application, then you've got to segment the thing out, and then you've got to figure out the pieces and the parts and so on and so forth. And I usually start backwards. I like to get the shell in place and then slowly bring the logic in as we know that endpoints are working, but those are some of the specifics we'll look at here. Port binding, export services via port binding. It just means here's the URL. It's a fancy word. I've never found a very good explanation of it. I think that they just threw that in because they needed to get to 12 because they thought the 11-factor app sounded a little odd. Concurrency, you want to scale out via the process model. That kind of goes up there with the processes, is that if I've got a lot of people coming in, I want to be able to scale up in real time, and I don't have to worry about me stepping on each other if I'm able to just add more servers and scale out. Disposability, maximize robustness with fast startup and graceful shutdown. Okay, once again, I think that's another one because they didn't want to have 10. Logs, treat logs as event streams, and admin processes, run admin management, blah, blah, blah. The dev prod parity. This is the one that I get 80% performance improvement on. When the developers are building and testing in an environment that looks like prod, they get things done faster because they find bugs faster, because they find issues faster. And then once you've gone from point A to point B, all the other stuff makes sense because you've already built and tested it before you get to production. So, how are we doing on time? Is there anybody that is bored out of their skull at this point? How many people want to see code?
Can I just bring something in? You mentioned that number 9 is maybe not relevant, but I thought this was very important as far as microservices, scalability issue, but the whole concept, it should be, service should be easily brought down and easily brought up. That's because each service is ephemeral. So,
Yes, it is ephemeral. So that, hey, Matt Bush, that means that it's just there for a little bit of time. I'm sorry, Matt works with me at my company, and so we have a little joke in there. What I'm talking about is that when you have, and we'll talk about this some in this specific implementation when you're working in Cloud Foundry, when I bring up a service, it can take as long as it needs to come up. And so you would like to get it up as fast as possible, but the way that this is worded is they want to get fast startup and a graceful shutdown. You can rip these things out from underneath them if you've written them right. It has no impact on everything else that's in there. So I didn't have a graceful shutdown. I think what they mean is instead of a graceful shutdown, it's a graceful failure. If I fail spectacularly, I don't bring everybody else down with me. When I start back up, I'm not dependent on knowing about anybody else when I start up. So I think that's more about what I was thinking. Does that? So I think that, are there any other questions? No? So there's a couple of like technologies that I have. Has anybody worked with Spring Boot? I'm expecting to see the Spring Boot guy back there. I do. I get paid for it. Spring Boot's opinionated, and what they're trying to do is give you the ease of implementation by filling in the blanks of all the standard boilerplate stuff. So what it means to be opinionated is we could talk about going down to the bar. If you go to the bar and you tell the bartender, I want a beer, if you don't tell him what kind of beer you want, he's going to have an opinion, he's going to give you whatever he likes. But if you tell him, I want a Blue Moon, or I want this, or I want that, he'll give you whatever you ask him. So what Spring Boot is bringing to the table is the fact that you can just create a Spring Boot project and pretty much push it out into Cloud Foundry, and it'll start up and it'll do all kinds of magic for you. And it'll make assumptions. So if I'm using an MVC or a web service, it includes all of those libraries for me. When I start it up, it's going to default to using ports 8080. If I want to use a different port, I can tell it to use a different port, but in its opinion, it's going to use 8080 because it's available. When you're using data sources, when you define your data source, you're going to tell it, here's what I want to use, and it's going to use that information to go and put your data source together. And so one of the examples I'll show you here, I created a MySQL database. So if I don't create a MySQL database, it's going to create a data source for me. Once it finds a MySQL database, it'll go ahead and use that. I don't even have to give it any of the information to start up. So what I did is I didn't want to give a lot of custom code. I went out to Spring site and I just downloaded the code from their site, and I put it into Spring Tool Suite, and I started it up, and then I worked with my Pivotal account, and I pushed it out to Pivotal. Just wanted to see what happens. So I'm not a huge fan of JPA. Mostly I'm not a database guy, but every time I've gotten involved with JPA, it's usually because something's gone horribly wrong on the other end. I did use it today because I didn't actually have to do anything to get it to create data tables for me. I just started it up and it created them for me. Then I went off to another third-party site and I created a database over there, and then I put those credentials in, and instead of using the one locally, it went over there. So I was trying to get some examples of code that we can go through. Unfortunately, the code examples I'm working on that were database specific are still in process, but I'm going to put them in the tbegin Bitbucket account there, or the GitHub account, probably around the time we get to the Spring Days. So, any other questions? Okay, I apologize. Going through that, I would have much rather just open the window and go through the applications. So let me work backwards. I want to work, how many people here have never, ever in their life seen Pivotal's dashboard? Okay. This is Pivotal's dashboard. Yeah, that was exciting. I happened to look down and I was like, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to go to pivotal.io. If you would like to get access to their dashboard and be able to create your own Pivotal application, you can register. I've already registered and signed in and given them a credit card, so they will happily charge me. All right, so I logged in and it says, now where should I go? I want to go to Pivotal Web Services. So I'm back to where we started. I created an organization. I called my organization bottleneck.org. Within the organization, I have spaces, AJUG, development, and inside of each of those, I have applications. So the reason that you have an organization, this has to do with the billing and segmentation out of resources. So what Pivotal is going to provide for you is if you have if you have infrastructure as a service, that's going to give me a server. I'm responsible for doing everything on it. If I get a platform as a service, then what this is going to do is it's going to take my applications and it'll create containers for me. So all I have to do is push my application out there. You got to do a couple of other things so it knows how to create your container, so on and so forth, but it's going to go ahead and take care of all that for you because it's a platform as a service. You then only have to worry about your applications. So within an organization, this was described by Cade Thacker at Home Depot very eloquently. He says, this is an apartment building. Your spaces would represent different apartments. And then all of the quota that you've got to work within the building gets segmented out to the applications within the different apartments. So once you have an apartment, you've got so many rooms in there. If you want to make it bigger or smaller, you kind of got to go do some construction. Does that make sense to everybody? So the reason that this is done is that you are getting charged by the quota of resources and memory that you're using. Well, that's not what I want to do. So you'll see here I have different pieces here, but I have one application that's been pushed out, but overall in my org, I have 2 gigabytes of 25 gigabytes of space being used. This has got one instance. It's using a gigabyte of memory. The last time I pushed this application out is 2 hours ago. So, does that make sense to everybody so far? Probably not, but I'm going to go through and see if we can get it to make a little bit more sense. I downloaded one application, this Accessing Data MySQL Complete application from this import Spring Getting Started content. So what this does is this will actually create a project for you. It'll pull it down from Spring's GitHub repo and it will install it into your IDE, and then you've got the sample code and you can run it locally. So if I want to run this locally as a Spring Boot application, it will do that. I am trying to get that. Okay, so basically what this has done is it's taken this application represented here in this for class. So I've got a Spring Boot application. It has a main controller. I'm not going to read all of the description in here, but essentially what it's going to do is it's saying I'm going to request my path mapping, and it's going to use a JPA repo. So you're going to create a user object, and you're going to set the name and the email when you press it in to the endpoint, and then it's going to create it in or save it in whatever data source it is going to create. And so it's going to use the CRUD repository implementation from Spring to use JPA to figure out to actually do the implementation for all of its CRUD operations. Okay? So what that would mean is when I run this and it starts up, it will tell me, hey, look at all this exciting stuff that's going on. I'm starting it up. Look, I'm creating all your endpoints, your mappings, blah, 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 blah. So Tomcat is started on port 8080, and it's now up and running, been running for 6 seconds. So that means I can locally go to my window here. Sorry, close those, but I can go to local, host, 8080 demo all. So there's nothing there. If I do the add endpoint, so it just told me that it saved it. And if I go back and do my all again, it will give me that back from my persistent method. All right. So now let's kind of go back through the application of what I just did. And this Spring application, it just annotates itself as a Spring Boot application, which tells it, hey, we're going to run this, and you're going to have Spring Boot take care of bringing in all the other pieces and parts that you need as you start up. The main controller, we're annotating as a controller and giving the request mapping. So we're telling it that we are going to have this respond to demo, and this method, the add new user, will deal with the add, and this will deal with the all. And so the JPA is going to take care of doing all the lookups for us in the standard JPA implementation. If you need any more on that, I'm not the guy to ask because I hate JPA. And so the other excitement is that it has built its entity or its model to use, and it is implementing this interface so that it can, JPA can go ahead and take care of doing the implementation for you. So what was exciting about this is that when it first started up, it gave me, it didn't have this URL information, the username, password. I went out and created a MySQL database over here in freemysqlhosting.net because one of my guys told me, hey, you could go start this up. So I did, and it gave me this information. I just added the application properties to this particular implementation, and then I ran it, and then it created and it started, and everybody was happy, right? So that's not the exciting part. The exciting part is, well, what happens when I'm done with this and I'm like, I want to go push this to production? Well, I can use the command line. It's called the CFCLI. If you go back to the dashboard, and it says web services, tools. It gives me a little download and install the CLI. I recommend to everybody, if you want to start learning how to do Pivotal Cloud Foundry, use the command line interface, because like using Git, you're really going to get to see all the different pieces and parts and what it does, and you get a better understanding of what's happening. So these are all the commands. Can you read that? Let's see if I can get that to go a little bigger. So basically, when you're going to function in the platform as a service, it's got these little chunks of functionality that it's describing its command on, but it's basically getting your target set up so you're pointing to your org and your space. So you've logged into your org and to your space, and you're telling it, this is where I want you to put all this stuff. So when you deploy this application, we're going to go into the bottleneck org, and we're going to stick it into the development space. And then the application lifecycle, you got push, start, stop, restart, restage, blah, blah, blah. This is taking care of getting the application up there, getting it configured, and then starting and stopping it within the lifecycle of Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Services, this is where you start defining and binding to your services. Remember we talked about treat everything as a backing service? These are the commands that will take care of doing this. So if you want to create your own, that's where you have this thing called cups. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Your route and your domain management and your space management. So your route and your domain management, you'll notice when I come up to the dashboard, can everybody see that where it says domains? cf-tcpapps.io and cfapps.io. What this says is this platform is going to respond to those domains. So if I have an application, I push it out. I had called this one the AJUG-data application. Its name is going to be appended to the front of this domain. So that's how I'm going to get to it. The route that Cloud Foundry is going to take is going to be whatever that app name is and that domain, and it's going to route it to the appropriate instance or instances of this application. And finally, you have space management, org management, plugin management. Basically, if you've got people that you want to secure and allow to do things in your organization or your spaces, you can control their application security at that level. So that way, if you're an org manager, say you work for a company named, I don't know, the Home Depot, you can have a department organization. You can have something that says, hey, I'm going to be in purchasing. So the purchasing organization would then have different spaces. Well, maybe you have people that are working for these vendors or these vendors or these vendors, and you don't want them to be able to see each other. So the org manager could then manage the spaces and give select people access to their own spaces. That limits the number of people that can go in and use all the information in the quotas. Are there any questions on that? Okay. So the push, there's a push command, and this push command is what you use to take the output of your application. So when I ran this, I'm at the command line in the application for the accessing data MySQL complete. So if I were to run this, sorry, I want to actually run it. Okay, I just built my jar, this ajugdata.jar. The way that you would then tell Cloud Foundry how it needs to deploy your application is you're going to generate a manifest.yaml. You can call it whatever you want, but it will default to using manifest.yaml. So I said I want you to have this application named AJUG-data. So the AJUG-data is what it's going to append in the front. Tell it to use a gigabyte of memory. I tell it to use a random route and then use the target ajugdata.jar, which is located in my target directory. So that's this guy. So I just built that. And when I do a CF push, all the magic's going to happen. All right, you'll notice here, it created this route, ajug-data. You'll see how it says dash inconsecutive dash dipyramid.cfapps.io. I told it to use a random route so that if I were to take the same exact application and I was to push it out and keep pushing it out and keep pushing it out, I could have several versions running at one time in that environment, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to add those random words at the end of it, so you have a unique route.
So the manifest.yaml, did you write it or what is it generated?
I wrote that one. In some of them, they are generated.
And you said you defined the route somewhere. Where did you define it?
Okay, by default, it will use the name, and then that's why I put the random route on there. You can also put in a command line argument and say host name and say use this host name, and it will use that. Does that make sense?
Deploying that you're talking about production. Where in it are you giving it the direction that this is a production deploy? That's what this theoretically is, right? It's a production deploy.
Yeah, I just assumed that whatever this one that I'm pushing into is production. I don't have anything other than it's really the only environment I have right now that's an AJUG. So for me, that's my production environment.
Okay. I mean, I just, when you think about the promotion of a bill to the different environments, usually.
Funny you should mention that. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Remember when we talked about having the repos and we separate out our configuration files?
So I'm just getting at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, but that's right. I cannot tell you how many weeks it took me for people to get there. Everybody that I worked with would write a manifest-dev, a manifest-whatever. And we would end up with 17 of these in the same project, and then people had to keep track of which org is going to this and which one is going to that, and so on and so forth.
Instead you use environment variables instead of environment variables based on
Correct.
chef or puppet
Or whatever. And so what we would do then is in the secret repo, we would create, that's where we would keep our manifest. So, your question, do you have to write it or is it given to you? Well, I got one. They're like make files. Does anybody have a make file in their history? I don't think anybody ever wrote one except the guy that wrote the first one. And there was like one big great-granddaddy make file, and we all kept passing it around. And that's when the Emacs and the VI wars went, because people kept changing the tabs. Hey, Burke, you changed the tabs, didn't you? You changed the tabs. So, let me go back. Let me go to GitHub, because now everybody's like, okay, now I want to hear about the YAML file. What I did is I had this all set up, and then they had to set my laptop up for video, and then we kept going back and forth, so I have all kinds of crazy windows here. Okay. You'll see here where I have two repositories. I have bottleneck and I have bottleneck secrets. Is there anybody out there that's gone to my GitHub repo? You can't see bottleneck secrets, can you? So what I have done is, you'll notice I have my master branch. So in the master branch, this is where the environment-specific items go in bottleneck secrets. So if I have a deploy script, say I want to deploy something, I should always be deploying this the same exact way to every environment. So that means that this should be up at my master branch. When I want to deploy to an environment specific, I should branch to the environment I want. So if I have development should have its manifest. When I go to stage, it should have its manifest. When I go to production, I should have its manifest. So what I do is when I go through that whole build and deploy process, if I'm using, Jenkins, I'm using Concourse, I'm using whatever, my build artifacts are built already doing one job. I either stick them into Artifact or I archive them on disk or a combination thereof, and then my deploy jobs will run. So then I can do that, run the test, and so on and so forth. The only thing that changes then is which repo it pulls it from, but the command to deploy is always the same. CF push whatever, blah, 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 blah. So it's consistent. So did that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different way of accomplishing the same outcome, but yeah, it's actually, it's cool. I mean, we use chefs, so we have data bags that essentially have the properties in it, and essentially all the environment specific stuff is going to be environment variables.
So to his point, what he's saying is that they use Chef, and so they have data bags, and they have all their environment-specific stuff. And that is acceptable in this environment. When we did this, this was specifically to get people to work in Cloud Foundry, and they were doing a lot of the stuff manually. So it was, how do I pull the stuff together so I can understand that concept of the building and the running? And depending on the tools you're using, Puppet has a different way that approaches it. And
I think, I mean, it honors the intent of the 12-factor app, you know, either approach.
Right.
So you're separating out the, you know, the environment-specific stuff and a thing that allows you to essentially have the same code base and the same deployment scripts and everything else run the way it's supposed to, and you keep the environment-specific stuff over here.
it also gives you an audit trail, because when you get people out there just using their VI and Emacs tabs, you don't know who just messed this thing up, and you've got no history. Where did this come from? Who said to do this? How do we do that? You have no way to roll back. How did we get to this point? And how do you know you typed all of that? So that's really, this is trying to just keep into that spirit.
So you're saying your configuration should be under version control like that?
Just like your VMs, your infrastructure should be under version control, your database schemas, all of the stuff you got your wife on her anniversary and so on and forth, so that, you know, you can come back and say, no, I did remember, see, it's right here. Yeah, anything that you can put into version control is going to help you out. I really didn't believe this. I love to be that loose cannon running around until my wife was ready to divorce me because I didn't make one of those, because I had brought down the entire eastern seaboard at UPS. That's an oops. Oops. Okay, so let's go see what happened when I pushed this. So while we were talking, what it's easy for me to say. What Cloud Foundry was busy doing is it took our application, it took this manifest file, used the build pack. I'm not even going to start going into the build pack. You can feel free to go check those out. But the build pack is how Cloud Foundry knows to set your container up. What am I? Oh, if you don't tell it which build pack to use, it's going to guess because it's opinionated. Oh, this looks like a Java application. I'm going to use the Java build pack. So app AJUG data, we started using this command. Whoop. If you want to change any of that, feel free, but that's what I did. I'm going to show this app AJUG data in org bottleneck and space development as this user. So it started, I got one instance, 1 gig. And if you go to this URL, you're going to get that particular app, and here's all that. So what does that mean to me? That means that and let's go back here. I want to go to demo. What did he call me? Oh, I went to development. Oops. There we go. Sorry. Went to development. There I go. AJUG data. I want to do demo. All. Oh, it's empty, so I do an add. First. And email equals email at work.com. So it saved it, and so if I go down to all, so now I have a list. Was that exciting? All right, so now what I've done is I have just pushed this application out on the platform. I've used all these wonderful things that they told me about in this project and so on and so forth, and say I just changed something in the configuration. How do I get the platform to take that into account? I do what's called a restage of the application. So you'll say stf restage jug data, boom. So it's going through and it's going to tear it down and build it back up. It's like The Bionic Man. If anybody's seen The Bionic Man, I wish this thing would go faster. This is what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's not the fastest thing in the world. But because of those routes, what makes it fun about routes is that I can actually have two versions of these running at the exact same time in a space. And then I can have them both pointing, have the same route pointing to the same two instances. And is anybody familiar with blue-green testing? That's all the Spring guys. All the Spring guys are going, yeah, we got it. So blue-green testing allows you to go, okay, I'm going to push this, it's going to be blue, and I'm going to push this. So let's take two different instances, put them in there, see how one runs, see how the other one runs, but you don't have to have any downtime. So what we used to do is we would have a version, so we would push it out as a version 1, and then we'd push out version 1.1. Once they were up and running and we kind of did a smoke test on them, then we would map the route, and then we would unmap the other route. There was no downtime to the end user because all the calls were stateless. So as long as people were coming in and going and so forth, we would slowly fade them in, and then we would slowly fade them out. All right, we'll come back. So while he's busy working, because I've got 5 minutes left, if I want to scale my application, remember we talked, we want to be able to scale it up without interfering with anybody. I'm going to go to AJUG, which I'm running the same exact application. Sorry, I cannot type. Uh-oh, I got a generic JDBC connection. That's because I'm pointing to the same database I just ripped out from under it. Let's go to Spring Music. So this is another application that I downloaded to check with PCF Dev. Pivotal also will provide you a local Cloud Foundry instance that's called PCF Dev, and this would be the sample application that you can utilize with that. If I would like to, yeah, okay. Go to settings. All right, so this is my, remember we were talking about resource, want to manage our resources. So if I want to have more than one instance, I want to have a memory limit, I want to increase my disk, I can spin these up here. So I just scaled this to 3. Yeah. My apologies. I pushed into the wrong space. Oops. Which is why you shouldn't do this manually. And so what I did is I just trashed my database connections. Because there was another thing I was going to show in there is that when you're using JPA, when you create it, it keeps writing over the top of the database. And so I didn't change the configuration to say none. And so because it took so much time to crash and I wanted to show you the base scaling, I'm not going to wait for it to come back down. Just get that thing to scale back up. So hopefully that was enough with the data source. I was trying not to get too much in the specifics of the implementation, but I'm getting to like 10 after 8 here. So I want to open it up. I'll still be here if you want to have any other discussions, but what I'm going to try and do is as I'm putting together my data sources stuff, I'm putting a little bit more instructions on how to go through the different pieces of the 12-factor apps, but specifically in implementations, not only in Java, but also in Spring and in Cloud Foundry. And it just says here, look, I've got 3 instances that are running, and what this means is that I now have 3 instances that are able to, when I go to that particular endpoint, it's going to round robin them through the different instances there. So the point being, I just took these JPA type samples. I'm able to take the code as written, change some configurations, and it could go directly into production. I mean, okay, not recommended, but hey, it's JPA. It's just creating and doing these things out there. So it can go into whatever my definition is. All right. Is there any other questions on there? Yeah, I apologize this didn't go smoother, but I hope that you enjoyed it. If you didn't, my name is Bert Huffnagel. If you did, then my name is Tim Begin. I appreciate that you spent this time here with me. You had a whole lot of other things you could be doing, but you came here. I do hope that you'll come visit us there at Spring Days. Hopefully we'll get it all together. So thanks for your attention. I appreciate it.